Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com. Here with some thoughts on how to beat David Haye, the heavyweight champion. Now, I'm making this video because I believe there are some great fights involving some Hall of Fame fighters that right now the public is laughing at. These Hall of Famers are being looked down upon. They want a shot at the heavyweight title, and people seem to feel that it's a mismatch. Well, I don't. I believe three guys give David Haye a lot of trouble, and I'm here to talk about why I believe that. And those three guys are light heavyweight Bernard Hopkins, his nemesis, light heavyweight Roy Jones, and current heavyweight, he's a senior citizen, but current heavyweight Evander Holyfield, David Haye's idol. Now, let's talk about my biases. Longtime viewers know that I believe that every fighter can be beaten, and that includes Floyd Mayweather, right? Let's just look back through history, right? Some of the most unbeatable fighters, even elite fighters, have lost matches. Gene Tunney, if you research it, lost to Harry Greb, right? Those in the building during the first Rocky Marciano Roland LaStarza fight, and take a look at the scoring on that fight. It's on boxrec.com. Those in the building, at least 50% of them thought Rocky Marciano lost that fight. In fact, the great trainer Lou Duva, who was a personal friend of Rocky Marciano and loved Rocky, believes Rocky's the best heavyweight in history, even he concedes that, in his opinion, and he was there, Rocky Marciano lost the first fight to Roland LaStarza. There is a great YouTube video involving ESPN's Brian Kenny. Bert Sugar's in the video where they talk about that first LaStarza fight. Take a look at the scoring of the fight on BoxRec. You're going to be very surprised at that, right? You can literally go down through history and see great fighters who lost in their prime. Sugar Ray Robinson, who at his best was probably the best pure boxer that I have seen, right? Unlike Ali, Robinson could either play the role of being hunted or could be the hunter, right? Rocky Marciano actually lost in his prime to the Raging Bull, the real Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta, a volume puncher, right? And so my point to you is that fighters can lose, right? Great fighters like Carlos Monzon, he lost. Even the great Ricardo Lopez, Boxing Hall of Famer, has a draw on his record. One of my favorite fighters in history, Salvador Sanchez, he had a loss on his record. Even Chavez, Julio Cesar Chavez, in his prime, anyone who saw that Meldrick Taylor fight, and I know I'm going to hear that's not quite his prime, but anyone who saw that Meldrick Taylor fight knows that with a different referee, Chavez may well have lost that fight as it happened. Okay? Now, let's talk about David Haye, and let's talk about why I think the three guys I named earlier have an opportunity to give him all he can handle. I already have a video up on how to beat Vladimir Klitschko, in my opinion, right? And everything that applies to Vladimir Klitschko applies to David Haye. I believe that a good bobber and weaver, and keep in mind, you can't become a bobber and weaver, right? We saw Sam Peter in his last fight against Vladimir Klitschko try to be a bobber and weaver. Now, I'm talking about guys who just naturally are able to bob and weave their way inside. You know who I'm talking about. Guys like Jack Dempsey, guys like Joe Frazier. I believe a bob and weaver can literally get inside on David Haye and smash him up. In fact, let's talk about David Haye before I go further. Let's talk about what makes him tick what makes him one of the best heavyweights on the planet. First, let me say this. There are a lot of pound for pound heavy hitters in boxing, right? I'm sure we all have a list. On my list are guys like Juan Manuel Lopez, right? Kelly Pavlik is a guy I consider with a big punch. Arthur Abraham is a guy I consider with a big punch. I believe one of the secrets to David Haye is that of everyone in boxing, pound for pound, David Haye might be the hardest puncher in the sport. He hits at least as hard, in my opinion, as both Klitschko's. In fact, I would say that David Haye probably has a harder punch than Vitaly Klitschko, right? We've seen, including the last fight, guys hanging around several rounds with Vitaly Klitschko, getting hit with several punches. You never see that with David Haye. Also, when you look at David Haye's fights, even his worst moments, the Carl Thompson fight, Carl Thompson, who comes out in the first round ready to do damage, just like Enzo McInerney, we'll just call him Enzo, just like Enzo came out against David Haye and was ready to do damage in the first round. Curiously enough, by the second round, both Carl Thompson and Enzo were beaten up and were discouraged from coming inside. David Haye hits that hard. Also, David Haye is very light on his feet. Take a look at the first knockdown in his fight against John Ruiz. You're going to see that David Haye can actually bounce around the ring. He's one of the few heavyweights who can throw very hard punches. He's very coordinated between his hands and his feet, so much so that at times he looks uncoordinated in the ring, but yet he's very coordinated with his hands and feet. He can literally throw very hard punches while he's moving around. He's a very hard hitter. His overhand right, quite frankly, is one of boxing's best punches. It's right on par with Saul Alvarez's left hook, right? You're talking about a very quick-handed guy, too. David Haye has hand speed. He doesn't telegraph his punches. The guys he hits, even veteran guys like John Ruiz, who have been in with great fighters, are literally hit flush and they're hit cold because David Haye doesn't telegraph his punches, right? Now, all of that said, I believe David Haye is vulnerable. Take a look at his feet. In fact, take a look at his feet in the fight he lost, right? We know Haye's not unbeatable because he's already lost the fight. Take a look at the fight he lost to Carl Thompson. You're going to see that David Haye, quite frankly, keeps his feet too wide apart, right? The reason he's able to throw very hard punches is his feet are already wide apart in throwing punch motion, right? So, to beat David Haye, what a shrewd fighter has to do is to keep David Haye's feet tangled. You can time David Haye's feet. Let me go further, right? Take a look at the first round of his fight against Enzo. You're going to see something that's interesting, right? David Haye doesn't throw too many jabs, and that's very important. Contrast that with the Klitschko brothers, who, take a look at Vitaly Klitschko's fight against Sam Peter. You're going to see that that was a jab fest. Sam Peter eats dozens of jabs every round. Take a look at Vladimir Klitschko. Everyone who's watched the Vladimir Klitschko fight knows that Vladimir Klitschko early on really just lives off a jab and an occasional left hook, right? He's a jabber. David Haye is not a jabber, right? What David Haye's game is he is feinting. He's a feinter. He is trying to feint you into a defensive lapse so he can then use hand speed on you. That gives fighters who need to take breathers, like Roy Jones, like Bernard Hopkins, like Evander Holyfield, an opportunity to pace themselves to go 12 rounds with David Haye, because David Haye is not sticking the jab in your face the entire fight. And so I think that that's very important, because given David Haye's defensive lapses, don't believe me, do a Google search on David Haye's interviews himself after the John Ruiz fight. He'll actually tell you that he was disappointed with his defense in that fight. I believe that a fighter like a Bernard Hopkins, who can actually move, because that's the key with David Haye. You want to move. You want to move like Bernard Hopkins moved against Felix Trinidad. Take a look at that fight. Hopkins understood that Trinidad had to plant his feet to do damage. So Hopkins kept Trinidad moving. You have to move against David Haye, and you can also relax a bit on the outside, because you know David Haye is not going to come at you with jabs, right? That brings me to my next point. See, I'm already at 11 minutes. Take a look at Jimmy Young's fight against Ali, right? One of the secrets to Ali was that Ali was a guy who liked to be hunted, right? He was a guy who liked when you came at him, that's when he was his most effective. What Jimmy Young did in that fight is he forced Ali to take the lead, right? David Haye is that rare breed where he is a slugger with a heavy punch who likes to be hunted. Look at all of his fights. Look at the first round of the Enzo fight. Look at the Carl Thompson fight. Look at the Monty Barrett fight. You're going to see in all of these fights. John Ruiz. David Haye likes to have his guy come to him. Then, of course, the fighter is chasing David Haye around the ring, and then David Haye is able to time, good overhand right shots and stuff like that. He leads with power shots. He doesn't waste time on jabs. A shrewd fighter like Bernard Hopkins would have David Haye at a disadvantage by forcing David Haye to take the lead, right? If you fight the Jimmy Young fight against Muhammad Ali, and these fights are on YouTube, I believe David Haye falls apart. Let me go one step further, right? Why am I talking about light heavyweights in with a heavyweight champ? David Haye doesn't impose his weight on you. He doesn't make size an issue. You know the heavyweights who do. Guys like George Foreman. You remember the Thrill in Manila? He has Ali up on the ropes. Ali has to deal with George Foreman, right? Chris Arreola. These are guys who literally, hunt you down. You know you're in with a big man. He's bothering you. There's no place to hide. There's no place to even take a rest. That's not David Haye. You actually have an opportunity to rest. David Haye's not leaning on you. I challenge the viewers here. Tell me the fight where David Haye actually makes his size an issue. No, what he's making an issue is his punching power and his hand speed. That will create an opening for the fighters I'm talking about. Unfortunately, it looks like I'm out of time. Just know that with David Haye, you can time his feet. He doesn't make size an issue. He likes to be hunted. He's not a hunter. He doesn't shoot a jab to keep you at distance. Now, all of this said, I believe there is nothing in this video that could help Audley Harrison. Audley Harrison simply doesn't have the foot speed to keep up with David Haye. The fighters I've mentioned do, right? Because you need foot speed to keep up with David Haye. Audley Harrison is exactly the kind of guy that David Haye makes victims of. He's a plodding heavyweight who needs to follow David Haye around the ring. David Haye can then time his feet to hit him when Harrison isn't in position to hit Haye's back. Also, take a look at Haye's videos. Look at the length at which he spreads his feet. That's something an opponent could read. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments for me at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for indulging me on this video.